Welcome to Business Talk, presented in collaboration with the University of Rio Grande and the Ohio State University South Centers, from the heart of southeastern Ohio at the University of Rio Grande TV studio. Our goals are simple: promote the University of Rio Grande and the Ohio State University South Centers, as well as advocate local small business and their support organizations. More importantly, promote southeastern Ohio as a wonderful place to live, explore, and learn. There are many different ways you can find us. The University of Rio Grande Cable Access Channel 17, live online at blogtalkradio.com, and on YouTube if you are unable to catch our show live. Introducing our co-hosts, Jason Winters, Mike Thompson, Patrick Dengel. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to our show. Today we have a unique guest that we've been trying to get on to our program for the last couple of months, and finally we were able to pin him down. You know, Jason, University of Rio Grande is an international school. And by that I mean it is a university filled with different unique cultures, and one of the areas that it tries to promote is that it's a very diverse program. And when you have diverse individuals and you have different cultures coming together, boy, you talk about a nice place to work, because you can see that all people, regardless of where they're from, are pretty much same.
Melting pot.
Yes, we are.
I think about how many different cultures we actually have living in our little community, and I can't name them. I apologize for that. But if you drive down Bevo Francis Drive and you look up on the poles, you'll see the different flags that represent the different countries, that represent the students that are actually within our population here on the campus.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I've always gravitated toward working with the university, is the fact that it is nice to see other cultures and to be educated on what it's like. And today we have Philip Walker. Philip Walker is the operations manager at the Silverbridge Coffee Company, and you've been there several times, and you enjoy their coffee.
I do. Jamaica Me Nuts is one of my favorites. That's so appropriate for college professor,
That is true. And recently he had a chance to go to, of all places, Ethiopia. And who would have thought Ethiopia was the one of the cradles of starting coffee?
I was actually surprised. When you actually told me what the topic was and what we were going to be discussing today, and that he'd been to Ethiopia, I thought, missionary trip?
I know.
I wasn't thinking coffee at all.
Well, it's just been a fascinating discussion that Mike and you and I and Philip have had. So allow me to welcome Philip Walker. Philip, it's really great to have you on our show.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
And I know that you have had a lot of different unique experiences, both in and outside the coffee shop, but feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm actually trained as a minister. I was in the ministry for 25 years. And then here about 7-8 years ago, I remained in the ministry. I started roasting coffee at the house in a popcorn popper, which can be very dangerous, so don't start that on your own. The word fire always comes to mind. But I started roasting coffee. My wife enjoyed it. My youngest child was entering kindergarten, and my wife was thinking about entering back into the workforce, and we decided to start a coffee company. Now move forward several years, and I'd been in the ministry for 25 years or so, and I was kind of tired. I find myself, I'm one who takes the emotional load of people and leave it on myself, so I needed a break, and so she decided that she would actually hire me to help her, and I had been helping her all along.
Did she make you go through an interview process?
Yes. 7 years of it. And then, so I basically assumed some of the operations management, roasting. I make sure all the maintenance is taken care of. I help out with deliveries and make sure things run as smoothly as possible. And frankly, as a small business, I just follow her orders, so I do the best that I can.
That's good advice all the way around.
And then our expertise is shared in the coffee industry, because just as she's taken classes and as a second-degree master roaster, I've followed her through those courses as well, and I've roasted alongside her. And when there's been problems, we kind of work through it. So I step into a lot of the roles that she played early on in the growth of the company and the shop itself. So
we as consumers of coffee really don't understand the whole process. We just think all you do is just buy a bag of beans and roast it, and there it is. But there's a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think we can tell the end product. We know when a cup of
Right.
coffee is good and when it's not.
Yeah.
But so what makes up the difference between that bad cup of coffee and that good cup of coffee? What's the difference in your beans?
A lot of it is the quality and sometimes the varietal of coffees. You'll see on a label package it says Arabica. That is a better quality coffee bean for the high-end user. It doesn't have the deeper bitterness that goes. Now, coffee is a bitter. Period. It has, Arabica coffees has more of a sweetness to it that we like, and then it is also in the area and the elevation that coffee is grown that some of the flavor profiles are set up. There's a different flavor profile for the country of Sumatra. There's different flavors that come out of Ethiopia. Out of Colombia and South America, you have more chocolatey backgrounds to that coffee as you taste it. And so those are some of the things that play into the cup of coffee that comes on your table every morning, or when you go to a coffee shop.
So it's my understanding that for an educational purpose, you went to Ethiopia.
Yes.
Meeting with other world business leaders?
Well,
or business coffee buyers?
One was we had a mixed group. All of them were connected to the Specialty Coffee Association of America. That is we call it the SCAA. Now the SCAA of America is beginning to join forces with the SCAE of Europe. So they're kind of one and the same entity in many ways. Well, they sponsor trips occasionally to different countries. My wife went to Peru a couple years ago. This is the first time they have been to Ethiopia, though. And Ethiopia is known as the birthplace of coffee.
That's
so we
what
had
I
both.
understand.
So we had coffee shop owners, we had roasters, we had somebody who was going to open a coffee shop, we had buyers from some of the high-end coffee roasters in the country. We had buyers from rather large countries. One of the buyers helped sponsor the trip. That is, he helped lead the trip because he has been heavily involved in coffee all along the way from the small guy to the large guy. So we had a whole big crew of different backgrounds that we could kind of share and collaborate and kind of help each other out to understand Ethiopian coffee and its process. So.
What is so fascinating to me, we only have a few images, or I only have a few images of what Ethiopia is. And unfortunately, it's been dependent upon difficulties with wars and
poverty
and things of that nature. And I'm always interested, and so just in that 1/2 hour, talking with you, there's a lot of unique things about Ethiopia that we, as in our culture, don't necessarily understand.
Right. We just get one point of view, and that's through the media and what they present primarily, unless it's a National Geographic program or something of that nature. And that's usually of a dry, arid, desert-like country with poverty. And maybe difficulties on the border of Sudan, or something like that, some conflict. Where the northern half of Ethiopia is more dry and arid, but the southern half is very, very beautiful. A lot of agriculture in that area, a lot of trees and forest and what we might consider tropical or jungle-like. Very much, if you were not paying attention as you traveled through the country over some of the mountains, you would almost think you were in parts of West Virginia.
That's very
Well,
interesting.
yeah, you don't see that on the news.
No, you don't. You don't. And what was unique, we were traveling some of these roads, and we'd pass these people running. You know, some of the greatest runners, athletes for marathons and long-distance runners come out of Ethiopia.
You passed them or they passed you?
Well, we passed them, fortunately. But we did move quite that slow at times on some of the Ethiopian pathways. So,
You know, in making coffee or coffee beans, it's my understanding that there has to be some processing from the country
right.
to where they are bagged and then they are sold to companies like yourself.
Yes.
And there's a certain amount of standards that has to be met.
Right.
And so when you went to Ethiopia, you were looking at their coffee beans, but also the process that they went through.
Yes.
And you brought some pictures.
We do have some pictures, and you know, just a quick summary is that, you know, the coffee is a cherry grown on a tree. It's picked off, and what we call the bean is actually the seed. And 2 seeds are in every coffee cherry, and then, you know, they have to go through the process of getting the pulp off of it, and then they collect it and put it in a bag, and then we import
eat
it.
the pulp?
It can be eaten, and they are beginning to experiment in different countries. And people are experimenting, entrepreneurs, what to do with that pulp, and they make it into juice and different things of that nature. But generally, it hasn't been known for, although it is sweet. It tastes pretty good, except you just got these big giant seeds in the middle of it, so it makes it tough.
Perhaps Darius or Mike or Kivante can show the. Can we see the picture of the tree?
Yeah, this is a typical a branch off of a coffee tree, or a bush, depending on how large you let it get. If you let it get too large, they don't produce as much. But that's a typical. Most of those are ready to pick. What has happened in Ethiopia is a farmer generally has maybe 3 to 6 hectares of property, which would equal a hectare is equal to 2.5 acres. So maybe they have 6 to 10 acres of land, and they have just coffee trees or bushes growing on that piece of property, kind of wild-like. And then once a year they go through and they pick off all the red cherries, or they pick off, actually what they were doing, they were picking off all the cherries, whether they were ripe or not, and processing it. But what has taken place in Ethiopia over the last few years is that they've been trying to educate the farmer to pick the cherries that are ripe. And if you can flip back just a little bit.
If you go back to that one picture.
The last picture of the cherries all laid out in a row.
Yeah.
You can see the different process. You can see the very young cherry just beginning to form. And then as you go over, you can see the bright or the red cherry, deep red, and then finally you have, that is a dried cherry. And then if you were to just take that ripe cherry and break it open and remove the mucilage, you'd see the 2 halves of that seed right there. That just falls down below that line of coffee cherry. So that gives you an idea of the growing process. The ideal position is when they're nice and red, is that's when you want to pick them. Sometimes they'll dry out on the vine and you want to take them and you don't want those. You want the nice red cherries that produce the most beautiful fruit. Now there's a Bourbon cherry that is a yellow that is awfully nice as well. Sometimes you'll see coffees called a Bourbon, like a bourbon. It has that yellowish, caramelish color to it. They'll pick those cherries as well on certain varieties. So,
You brought another picture. It looks like a map of some sorts.
yeah, the map is farther. That is just breaks down some of the botanical regions of Ethiopia. I don't think I can read the language at this point, but we're in that, I think, that center section. If I'm correct, we're in that center, maybe that greenish section in there, in those elevations.
My understanding, they have 70 different dialects of languages.
Yes, you can imagine at least 70 different tribes. here in the United States, we have kind of homogenized, but you still have many of those differences, many of those tribes in Ethiopia and in the different sections. So, you have to be sensitive to that on some level.
Wow.
So the commercialization of coffee production in Ethiopia, is it still done by hand, or are they utilizing machines?
It is primarily done, the picking is done by hand. In South America, Brazil, and parts of Colombia, you have the picking that isn't always done by hand, but that's not always higher end coffees either. But primarily high-grade coffee, specialty coffee is picked by hand, and that's very true in Ethiopia, especially among, these small farmers. That's all they have. And
Well, we know that Juan Valdez picks in Colombia. Is there a Juan Valdez in Ethiopia?
Well, he probably wouldn't go by that name if there was, and I don't know if they'd be using a burro as much, but
That's true.
great marketing tool for Colombia, though, I'll tell you that much.
Well, you brought several different pictures of different unique things. What are we seeing?
What you see there is coffee is very much embedded into the culture. My wife, when she went to Peru, coffee wasn't consumed by people very often, even in the communities. If they did, it was Nescafe. It was instant coffee because most of their coffee is exported. Well, Ethiopia uses upwards, I think that has changed a little bit, but they say at one time they used upwards of 50% of the coffee that was grown. And much of it is found in, this is part of their tradition. They would brew coffee, a very crude coffee actually. The higher grade coffee is sold. And they would brew it, and you'd get around in a little circle, and they'd pour it in those little Demitas cups, and you'd fellowship around that. You can see somebody brewing coffee at that point on some coals. Wow. And and to be polite, if you were offered coffee, you would stay and you would chat with the people. That was the polite thing to do. It was very much ingrained in their coffee tradition. Every meal that we participated in, they wanted us to sit around and drink coffee with them at least a little bit. And there were 20 of us in our group. So it was quite a production, and it kind of stretched our time for where we were supposed to go. But it was very important culturally to be receptive and to be kind. And even in the airport, they had a little area that you could be served coffee in the traditional way. So.
And this is a symbol of the exchange.
Yeah, this is the ECX. The ECX is the Ethiopian Coffee Exchange. They began to work with coffee heavily towards 2007, 2008. They basically, buyers would go into Ethiopia before that time. They would make a contract with a small farmer. They may get paid something decent for their coffee. They may not. Especially companies want traceability. They want to know what farm, where the plants are, where they're located, and people weren't being treated fairly. It was not helping out their overall economy. So the ECX came in, they wiped the slate clean in their Commodities Exchange and began a program whereby these small farmers had to take their coffee to a central processing facility, or if they were involved in a co-op. And what happened is that even the best coffee beans that were very unique were getting mixed in with, coffee that was good, but it was just average. And so the quality of Ethiopian coffee seemed to suffer a little bit, but what ECX was trying to do is to revamp their entire exchange system. And in doing so, it has
raised the standard.
Raise the standard of living so everybody could be fairly treated. And now, over the process of the last 5 to 6, 7 years, they're beginning to include now traceability, where this individual farm can now process their coffee. Now, it's not in full fruition yet, but we're getting closer to that.
Well, let's take a look at some of how they process that coffee. So here we have.
So you saw the cherries. They were picked. And can you go to one of the washing stations? This is after the washing station. Okay, what you have here is a washing station, is where they process the coffee. Do you see some red grinders on there? If you can flip back to that. The coffee in that cherry will go through these, and they're not really grinders, but they take the pulp off, and they remove the pulp from the bean. And the bean is then, see the red cherries there, they're dumped into that vat, they're processed. And then you can go back to that washing station. These beans are dumped into a place where they're fermented for about 24 hours, then they're dumped into these channels.
Now, when you say fermented, what do you mean by that?
Well, they allow them to naturally ferment in there in the sense that the water and the sugars and everything else, just like if you have a peach, or you might have certain fruit, apples will begin to ferment by themselves. You know, apple cider, if you leave it out too long, it'll get that.
Your sugar levels increase.
All that changes. And so they will ferment them just a little bit. They'll drop them in the tanks and they'll wash them, moving them back and forth. Then they'll dump them into another tank for upwards of 24 hours. And that'll stop the fermentation process.
Oh, okay.
Then you go back to the ladies here that were sorting the beans. Here that the beans are then spread out, and they are removing the beans that have faults to them. Either they might have wormholes, or they're tiny, or they don't meet the quality expectations of that particular co-op or that particular processing station. This is a lot of work going into that cup of coffee.
I would say so.
So when you go into a coffee shop and you buy that bag of coffee beans, especially specialty coffee, and you're saying, man, $12 for a pound of beans, or $15. This is a long process. And these people have worked hard to give you that product. And so that's why that was part of the education system that we're educated, we can pass that on to the consumer.
Something else I noticed, those pictures you were showing.
Yes.
Those are white beans. They're not
white.
not brown or black like we see in the stores.
No, they still have what they call a silver skin on them, and they're not roasted yet. So the silver skin is something another skin that will be taken off in the processing before they put them in the bags, what we call green coffee beans. They'll put them in those bags after the silver skin, after it's all dried out. In fact, if you can go to some of the naturals, they're the red beans. They're going to try to find that. But there's red beans out on the drying racks that we'll get to, that they go through another process. Those are called naturals.
Like this?
Like that. That's where they don't remove the pulp. They just let them dry in the sun.
Huh. Now you don't have anything to worry about with bugs or animals that are...
You really don't, because the bean is so hard. Bugs usually don't eat the seed.
Okay.
Occasionally you will find wormholes, but very rarely. That's a poor quality coffee bean. See how those have dried out?
I see.
So they will remove that as well as the silver skin. And so when we get green coffee beans, when they come to the shop, we don't know whether they're naturals or whether or not they're washed. They've gone through these two different processes other than what we've been told. And but when they come to us green, that's when we roast the coffee. And coffee roasting is in a sense a learned skill, whereby you go to a candy shop and they're making caramel. Some caramels better than other caramels. Well, what you're doing is you're caramelizing those sugars and those proteins in that small little coffee bean, and it's how you add heat and take away heat in order to bring that about.
The people that you met, now I know that you were with a group, and rarely did you have a chance to get out amongst the individuals, etc. But your overall opinion of people from Ethiopia?
My overall opinion is they are just they're seeking to better their lifestyle and their way of living. They're industrious. They're willing to work, but opportunities aren't afforded to them. And some of that is the infrastructure of the country that they're trying to improve upon. As I mentioned earlier to you personally, that China's investing heavily. U.S. aid is investing heavily into Ethiopia to try to alleviate some of the poverty by building up some of the infrastructure. And coffee is one of the ways that, it's 25% of their exports.
Oh,
and if we can elevate the price of coffee and the quality of it, they get more funding. They get more money.
There was one thing in doing a little bit of reading about Ethiopia that I was not aware of, that it is a country diverse with many different religious beliefs. There are the Muslims, the Judeo-Christians,
Yes.
the Coptic Christians. There is a variety of different religions, and they are known for working together.
Yes, there's not an antagonism between
Right.
the different Muslims and Christians have existed together for hundreds of years. Overall, in harmony, not because it's not an antagonism that goes back and forth. There's just a respect for, you have your opinion and we have our opinion, and they work very well together, except on the borders, from pressure from other countries.
Yeah, they're right on the border of Somalia.
And Sudan, yes, and you see now outside pressures of Islam there creating problems, but overall in the country itself, it's beautiful. So.
Well, we only have 1 or 2 more minutes. Are there some things you would wish we would have talked about? Now's your chance to.
Now's my chance. It is unique. I guess Ethiopia, beautiful people, wonderful culture that we can enjoy. The food from Ethiopia is just incredible. The injera bread and their hospitality is just outstanding. They're beginning to emerge. They're still a third world country, very much so, but they're trying to emerge. Ethiopia is trying to become a gateway to Africa in many ways, their airlines and their industry and everything else. So,
Well, I think it's great that other countries have recognized the potential.
yes,
And China, United States, and many of the other countries, etc.
If we wanted to support Ethiopian coffee, how do we know whether we're buying Ethiopian coffee when we go to the store?
well, I would generally, if it says Ethiopian coffee, generally from your higher end, there's not a lot of shadiness that goes on too much in the coffee industry. It can, especially if it's from Hawaii, and Kona coffees have some problems, Jamaican Blue Mountain coffees. But from Ethiopia, I haven't heard of any problems, but you could go to a high-end coffee shop and order coffee from places like that, buy a bag of coffee beans from a higher end coffee shop that we know that is being fairly traded, or from Silverbridge Coffee. We use importers that are high quality, very ethical in the way that they treat the exporters and the farmers. They're very much concerned.
Are you purchasing a lot of beans from Ethiopia?
Yes, we purchase quite a few. It's not, because it's so expensive, we just primarily use it in blends as well as small quantities. So.
Well, Philip, I want to thank you very much. We're speaking with Philip Walker. He's the operations manager at the Silverbridge Coffee Shop. I really enjoy talking about different cultures, Jason. And Philip, I want to thank you very much for shedding some good light on another country that I know very little about.
Well, thank you.
I'm Patrick.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Philip.
Thank you for listening.